already relied on fiscal transfer for national governments as they struggle to generate their revenues from local fees, charges, and municipal taxes. With COVID-19 pandemic, the challenges have increased. As we all know here, cities are coping with shortage of local revenues, more spending on social protection, and resulting economic recession all around the world. So that's why we need to make sure that the cities that we know have access to finance more than ever, and we need to know and reinstate that cities can have access to a diversity of financing mechanisms for local level through climate finance. So I'm very, very happy here to bring together this great panel to discuss all these topics. In particular, we're going to discuss challenges and possibilities to increase municipal revenues in post-COVID time. We're going to provide an overview of the newly launched City Climate Finance Gap Fund and the type of projects that it will support. And we also discuss how project promoters can identify and seek support from project preparation facilities. So as you may know, most cities, especially in developing countries, they face challenges in identifying and developing financial viable, low carbon and climate resilient infrastructure projects to attract both public and private finance. So this is why I'm also very pleased to announce today the launch of the Green Cities Finance Directory. So it's an online resources that us from the Cities Climate Finance Leadership Alliance, we created to help subnational governments and stakeholders to identify project preparation facilities to support them in developing green and resilience infrastructure. So my colleagues will now post a link to the directory in the chat, and we encourage and invite you all to take a look at this new resource and share it with those who might think it's useful. So we have a very packed agenda, so let's jump into it quickly. So this event is being jointly organized by the German Ministry of Environment, known as BMU, and the German Ministry of Development, known as BMZ. So I'm very happy to start and finalize the session with the inputs of both ministries. So first, let's hear an opening statement from Mrs. Heike Henn. She's the Director of Climate and Energy, Sustainable Urban Development and Environment. And she's also the Commissioner for Climate Policy and Climate Finance in the German Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development, known as BMZ. So the floor is yours, Mr. Heike.
Excellent. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues. I'm really happy to welcome you on behalf of BMZ for this virtual panel discussion today. And thank you very much, Mrs. Negreiros, for this inspiring introduction. And today's event addresses the really important issue of how cities can scale up finance for ambitious climate action. And it is great that we can discuss this important topic today virtually with speakers from 3 different continents. Cities are crucial for ambitious climate action, and the implementation of NDC starts locally. And however, to live up to this ambition, cities face huge challenges regarding the needs and the means to make this happen. What do I mean by needs? For once, we face a process of tremendous urbanization that will go far beyond everything we have seen so far, and much faster as the developments we have seen so far. And most of it will take place in Africa and Asia. By 2050, Africa's urban population will have grown by nearly 1 billion people, and in Asia by 1.2 billion people. So that's a challenge. And small, medium-sized, big cities will expand. New megacities will come up with infrastructure of one kind or the other to accommodate all these new city dwellers. Alone in Africa, 80% of the urban infrastructure needed for the urbanization to come must still be built. And this means that the decisions taken today, or next week, next year, will literally cement the development path for cities for centuries. So these are really challenging numbers, a challenging speed, and on top of it, the need for transformation. Up to 75% of global greenhouse gas emissions come from cities, in particular from road transport and the construction industry. And if we continue like we do it today with the traditional methods and materials, for this construction effort, it will lead to huge carbon emissions, or it would lead, because we have to find new ways and very quickly. But not only do we need climate smart investment in cities, but also cities have to build for a resilient pathway, because cities are increasingly affected by climate change, for example, rising sea levels, but also extreme weather events. So these are some of the challenges that cities face. And what are the means, on the other hand, in the hands of cities to deal with these challenges? And this rather complex task that requires careful and integrated planning. It's not only about money, but it also requires huge amounts of financing. It is estimated that more than $4 trillion are needed annually, especially in cities in the global south, to meet these rising demand. But cities lack the financial resources. We heard it in the introduction already. This is why this meeting takes place, and they lack the capacities to meet this demand. Financial transfers from the national level are limited, own revenues as well, and access to the financial market is difficult. And as we all know, COVID-19 adds to these challenges, because we need more funding in cities to protect people's health and also to provide the social services in times of a pandemic, while due to the recession, the economic downturn, the sources of revenues are drying up. So BMZ is acting, and the BMZ, we are strongly committed to close this gap in times of crisis, together with our partners worldwide, for more climate action, resilience, and a green recovery in cities and regions. So we launched an emergency COVID-19 support program that included targeted efforts to strengthen the provision of services and local action to fight the pandemic. Overall, for 2020 and 2021, BMZ is providing around 4 billion euros for the COVID-19 support in order to facilitate continued sustainable investment in the future. We think it's good, but honestly, it's not enough. We need to move the approximately 12 trillion US dollars that are put on the table globally for this COVID-19 response, and we need to move this money towards green recovery. This is 3 times the amount that was made available after the financial crisis. And we definitely need to increase our leverage. We just announced a 20 million investment for World Bank Green Recovery Facility in order to push for the 160 billion that the World Bank alone will release for COVID-19 response measures until 2021 towards green recovery. Colleagues, from my perspective, we don't have the time nor the money to spare if we want to reach the objectives for the Agenda 2030 and the Paris Agreement. We have to act now. And so we also want to target more support to overcome the challenges of lack of planning capacity and financial resources for integrated infrastructure development in cities. We are committed to develop new means to act quickly and reach many people, for example, by fostering the effective exchange of knowledge already mentioned through the Cities Climate Finance Leadership Alliance, because we know that collaboration is a must to succeed. We can get nowhere alone. Additionally, we are also improving cities' access to climate finance through tools as the Cities Climate Finance Gap Fund that was mentioned. With the expertise of World Bank, EIB, and GIZ, cities can now begin to build a pipeline of projects that will attract private capital. And I'm looking forward to hear more from city representatives today about their specific needs and good practices. We will discuss possible instruments to generate more income, and among them are the CCFLA and the Gap Fund. But the good thing is, colleagues, if we get it right, if cities, national governments, and partners get it right, this transformation for ambitious climate action is not only about the very important 1.5 degree pathway. This is a must. but also about the Agenda 2030. It's about job creation, service delivery, end of air pollution, just to name a few co-benefits of this transformation. And therefore, I wish all of us a fruitful discussion today, and of course that we all stay healthy and reach our common objectives. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Haken, for paving the way of the debate. I will already quote you in a phrase: we cannot do anything alone. So I'm very happy to call call the panelists of today's debate to discuss a bit what we do together. So let me introduce you the panelists of today's debate. I will start with Julia Macano. Julia is an economist working in the project Directorate of Urban Development Division at the European Investment Bank. She will be heading the EIB Technical Secretariat of the City Climate Finance Gap Fund. So thank you so much, Julia, for joining us. We also have Mr. George McCarthy, who is the president and CEO of the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy. The Lincoln Institute has worked for the last 70 years in research and recommendations of creative approach to land as a solution, economic, social, and environmental challenges. We're going to also have Justine Audran, who is an urban planner and a local government specialist, and the deputy program director from FMDV, which is the Global Fund for Cities and Development. And she's also the co-chair of the PPAG, so the Project Preparation Action Group in the Alliance. And finally, definitely not last, is Germano Breng. He is a lawyer and the Municipal Secretary of Environment and Sustainability of Porto Alegre, which is this great city and the capital of Rio Grande do Sul in Brazil, and also the president of the Municipal Councils for the Environment and the Master Plan of Porto Alegre. So let's start the debate. And I think like the first questions I want to talk about is definitely the questions that are very important to our city. So basically on green recovery. And I'd like to start with you, George. So given the challenges imposed on city budgets due to COVID-19 pandemic, I was wondering, through all the experience that Lincoln Institute has accumulated, what are some ways that cities can consider to increase municipal revenues now?
Thanks, and good afternoon and good morning to everybody. So right now, the real source of own source revenues is going to have to come from land, and that's because cities have so much control over land and land use, and cities' decisions around land use really do have a lot of influence on the value of land. And so, in order to increase, own source revenue, cities have to look at new ways to extract value from land, particularly value that's created by public action, by the decision to allow for more dense development, or the public investment that's made in the green infrastructure that would also lead to higher values of land. And so we've been studying and we've been advocating for the use of a variety of land value capture instruments that can find a way to recover the value of land that's activities that have nothing to do with the actions of the landowner. So for example, if you put in new infrastructure that makes land that was in the past not developable, but now can be developed because, I don't know, you've been able to contain water from sea level rise, that added value of the land should help to pay for that investment. And so some of the tools are pretty straightforward. They're direct land value capture tools like the sale of development rights, or the direct taxation of the capital gains that are associated with the ownership of land, sometimes called the land value increment tax. But then there's actually some old-fashioned ways, and I think that in the ways we think about land value capture today, we should look at the historic use of a land readjustment as a mechanism for being able to redesign the use of land and to implement things like green infrastructure, and then to use the direct sale of some of the land that has been improved as a result to pay for those improvements. So I'll stop there. I will add, of course, though, that the property tax is also a gigantic source of ongoing own source revenue. Land value capture tends to be a one-time deal, and we should pay a lot of attention to finding ways to increase the efficiency and the effectiveness of the collection of the property tax, which in most developing countries is abysmally low. So we can talk about that as well.
No, great. And very interesting perspective, George. We'll definitely talk a little bit more about it, because I'm sure that all city officials and organizations related to cities will definitely want to learn a bit more on how to do it. I will change a bit the perspective, like trying to think on ways that cities can actually raise funds, but now from like international public money. And I'll go for you, Julia, and ask you, so COVID-19 has shift priorities in cities and in the financial system. So like, could you tell us a bit more how the EIB is making sure that cities still have access to funding for the green transition while they're battling with COVID-19 impacts?
Yes, so thank you very much, Priscilla, and thank you everybody for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here and discuss these topics today. So from the EIB's perspective, of course, we want to make sure that we are supporting not only the recovery, but the green recovery. So we are really trying to stress the fact that cities need to push for achieving co-benefits. And I think it was mentioned before, the fact that a recovery and investment in the traditional sectors may or may not deliver co-benefits. So we have to really put the accent on the fact that some of the co-benefits are clean air, are reduced traffic, are improving the quality of life of the residents. So we are really trying to get this message across to the cities. Then in terms of what we are actually doing as the EIB, well, we have our standard lending, which is very much focused on cities. I will maybe, if we have time, tell you a little bit more later on about the EIB financing to the urban sector. But what we have been doing is we increased the lending and the funding for cities specifically for COVID recovery. So either for projects that are directly related to COVID recovery, so for instance, improvement or investments in health infrastructure or equipment, and also indirectly, so trying to release the pressure of the city's budget and help them invest in other infrastructure that was needed anyway, but may have been postponed or delayed because the budget priorities have shifted. So this is one thing that we do, and it's a slight, if you want, modification of our business as usual lending. And the idea is really to try and provide a quick answer to that, and we have been trying to top up some of our existing loans or include these priorities in new loans to cities. And then I think I would like also to mention the fact that as an EU institution, we of course are a big part of delivering the recovery and resilience facility that the EU has launched, and the EU Green Deal is of course the long-term growth strategy that should focus on green recovery. So there are a number of aspects in which we are active. In particular, we're very much concerned with the renovation of buildings. We have launched a new facility, which is the EIBR renovation initiative that is supposed to help increase the level of energy efficiency of existing buildings and also promote high efficiency standards for new buildings. We have the so-called green transport facility, and also we support the just transition mechanism under InvestEU, which of course refers only to EU countries, but I think it's very important because the green recovery can also make and the green transition can also make victims in cities and regions that whose economy is based on highly emitting sectors. So at the EIB, we are really trying to put an accent on facilitating the transition towards greener activities and green growth. but yeah, without forgetting that the green transition also comes at as a cost for some areas, some regions. So yeah, this is just to be short.
Thank you so much, Julia. And we know that you are doing even more because you're working also with the GAP fund that we're going to discuss a bit later. But it's very interesting to have this larger panorama on everything that EIB is doing. And I think like now I would jump into more of a perspective of a city network. And I'm going to ask you, Justine, so from the perspective of FMDV, who is actively working with cities and many different regions, so what is the role of the city network to make sure that the cities continue to pursue funding for their climate action plans and priorities while we are seeing so many shifts of priorities due to COVID-19?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Priscilla, and thanks everybody. So FMDV, just a quick word about FMDV. We are a global alliance of cities and local government created to promote and develop solutions to finance sustainable urban development. So from our perspective, I would say that city network can play a role at maybe three different levels. The first level, first and foremost, the national one, where cities network can actually help sustain the elaboration of national strategy for climate plans. And it's very important because they need to call national governments to engage in the development of national strategy to better finance and invest into cities and sustainable urban development. So for instance, at FMDV, we are currently exploring the development of national programs in some African countries through, for instance, policy dialogues to kickstart processes, reform processes, as well as developing technical assistance facility at national level in the country where we are working. And obviously at the international level, multi-stakeholders coordination will be even more important, as we said, to answer cities' increased need in a post-COVID situation. In that respect, we believe that this network can foster this dialogue space between cities and financial institutions and development partners at large, and also to develop adequate tools, actually, tools that can answer specific cities' needs, adapted also to local context, and to also localize these tools in cities, obviously. And eventually, obviously, the last level at the local one, building capacities on the ground is, of course, critical. And cities network in that respect, especially through their project preparation facilities, we believe have a great role to play to provide this technical assistance to cities to integrate their climate strategy into concrete projects, and especially at the very early stage where it's very important as well. Eventually, obviously, in the long, medium term, as we said, it would be very important for cities network to be mobilized to help cities rebuild their fiscal space to enhance their creditworthiness, especially through local economic development. So I'll stop with that. Overall, we think that cities network can help build the conditions locally and nationally by opening the dialogue between the different levels of decision and implementation, and bring stakeholders together, as this is done actually today.
Great, thank you so much, Justine. So we have heard how cities can raise revenue from land, a lot of different policies from the EIB, so like how international organizations can actually assist cities, and finally the role of city networks. And now I'm very happy actually to call Mr. Germano Breng, who is the city perspective itself. So like to tell us a bit more about Porto Alegre, what they have been doing, and some lessons learned and good practice from a project that they have developed. So Germano, the floor is yours. Feel free to share your presentation too, and be very happy to hear.
Okay, hello everyone. It's a pleasure to be part of this event and to be able to show you a little bit of the experience of Brazil on the climate change topic, especially in my city, Porto Alegre, which I am honored to be the Secretary of Environment and Urban Planning. I'm going to share some slides to show you how Porto Alegre looks like and to show what stage we are on the climate change subject. And as my English is not the best, to avoid any mistake, I will speak in Portuguese and make use of our translator feature, okay? So, share, please. Ok. Bom, rapidamente, eu gostaria de contextualizar um pouco Porto Alegre no mapa, né? Geograficamente, nós estamos localizados no extremo sul do Brasil, somos fronteiras com a Argentina e Uruguai, temos em Porto Alegre cerca de 1,5 milhão de habitantes e estamos inseridos em uma região metropolitana de 4,5 milhão de habitantes. Temos 9 grandes parques urbanos, 668 praças urbanizadas e 4 unidades de conservação. Somos pioneiros no país, criamos a primeira Secretaria do Meio Ambiente no ano de 1976 e em 2017 nós passamos a atuar de forma integrada ao planejamento urbano da cidade, o que nos dá mais força para implementar as políticas, né, de sustentabilidade na nossa agenda urbana. Em que pese a nossa tradição, né, na proteção ambiental, a gente entende que ainda temos muito que avançar, né? Diante, eu acho que dessa crítica realidade climática e ambiental, em que os países têm unido esforços, né, para firmar acordos que possam requalificar o desenvolvimento socioeconômico do planeta, a gente acredita que é urgente, né, a adequação dessas cidades a um sistema energético com um novo perfil mais renovável, né, limpo, baseado já na economia de baixo carbono. Nesse caminho, né, para ampliar receitas, né, diversificar as fontes de financiamento que dão suporte para essas medidas é extremamente fundamental, né? Porto Alegre vem tentando construir essa mudança, né? No início desse ano, por meio de lei, a gente instituiu aqui a política de sustentabilidade, enfrentamento das mudanças climáticas e uso racional da energia, né, aqui na cidade, desse ano de 2020. Também estamos no processo de revisão do plano diretor e construímos recentemente uma cooperação técnica internacional com o PNUD, né, o Programa das Nações Unidas para o Desenvolvimento, com o objetivo de inserir, né, no nosso arcabouço legal, né, a nova agenda urbana, os 17 Objetivos de Desenvolvimento Sustentável. Já como fruto dessa cooperação, bem interessante, é que a gente lançou o edital, agora há pouco, acho que no mês passado, o edital para atualizar o nosso inventário de gases de efeito estufa, né? Teremos, então, esse inventário para planejar, pautar todas as nossas políticas urbanas e ambientais, né? Inclusive na revisão do plano diretor. Mas o projeto que eu queria falar aqui rapidamente, dar destaque, que a gente vem desenvolvendo aqui em Porto Alegre, ele chama-se Luz do Saber. Ele traz, né, uma contribuição bem concreta, né, na construção de uma estratégia de baixo carbono em Porto Alegre, alinhado à área da educação. Bem interessante. A partir desse projeto piloto de 2016, que a gente construiu, foi feita a instalação de 10 painéis fotovoltaicas em uma escola da rede municipal. A tecnologia foi doada à prefeitura pelo ICLEI Brasil, né? E isso nos levou, por meio do programa de 100 cidades resilientes da Fundação Rockefeller, a participar do edital lançado pela Felicity, né? A Felicity, enfim, para quem não conhece, é lá um projeto da Agência de Cooperação Internacional do Governo da Alemanha, desenvolvido em parceria com o Banco Europeu de Investimento, né, que tem por objetivo facilitar a elaboração, implementação de projetos municipais com baixa emissão de gases de efeito estufa. Nós submetemos o nosso projeto por meio do Escritório de Resiliência e fomos aceitos. A partir, então, dessa aliança, a Felicity disponibilizou uma consultoria técnica, né, especializada para nos apoiar a construir a iniciativa. O projeto, né, o Luz Saber, ele trata especificamente da, né, instalação de placas fotovoltaicas e projeto de eficiência energética nas 99 escolas municipais. A partir dessa cooperação com a Felicity, a gente elaborou, então, um estudo de viabilidade dessas medidas de eficiência energética e de conforto térmico nas escolas municipais. O dimensionamento ele foi feito a partir de visitas, né, técnicas às escolas pelos servidores municípios que inicialmente participaram de um treinamento em auditoria energética, né? Esse treinamento ele aconteceu lá em 2019, no ano de 2019 ainda, onde teve capacitação de servidores para serem, né, os responsáveis pelo projeto, stakeholders, né? Ainda em 2019, no mesmo ano, a gente teve a capacitação dos auditores também para viabilizar a realização dessas auditorias, né, levantamento de equipamentos e possibilidades né, de substituição por sistemas mais eficientes, já apoiados na energia renovável, né? As medidas de eficiência energética, elas contemplaram um estudo para retrofit da iluminação, substituição das lâmpadas de baixa eficiência por LED, né? Instalação de fotocélulas na iluminação externa, sensores de presença, né, nos banheiros e divisão de circuitos elétricos das fachadas. Também os estudos contemplaram a substituição de telhas opacas por translúcidas nos ginásios e quadras cobertas, a substituição das geladeiras, os freezers antigos, instalação dos medidores e softwares de gerenciamento de energia em cada uma das escolas. Foi milimetricamente pensado, né? Medidas que visam, né, de fato, o incremento do conforto térmico foram definidas, como, por exemplo, a pintura de telhados de branco, de forma a ampliar, né, o índice de refletância e instalação de isolamento térmico nas coberturas. Já quanto à instalação das placas fotovoltaicas, foi elaborado um estudo de viabilidade de implementação dessas usinas fotovoltaicas em 70 escolas municipais, né, onde se identificou, né, a viabilidade técnica. Das 99, 70 se identificou viabilidade técnica. Por meio, então, dessa análise de cunho técnico-econômico, foi possível a gente definir quais são, né, as edificações elegíveis para receber os painéis, né, fotovoltaicos, assim como foi possível avaliar o dimensionamento do potencial de geração do sistema globalmente e localmente localizado, né, por escola. No início de 2020, então, e finalizando, após as análises das auditorias energéticas, foram apresentados resultados, né, que o projeto trará, de fato, para Porto Alegre, e aqui o elenco no slide algum deles, né, a geração distribuída, que são, né, as placas fotovoltaicas e a eficiência energética, para vocês terem ideia das escolas, elas somam um investimento inicial de 19,78 milhões de reais e uma economia estimada de 2,44 milhões ao ano, ou seja, em menos de 10 anos a gente recupera o investimento, né? É bem interessante. Agora, né, os termos de referência estão prontos, nós temos expectativa de viabilizar o financiamento desses projetos, né, para que eles possam, de fato, ser implementados nas nossas escolas municipais e nos ajude a criar um ambiente necessário para uma cidade, de fato, né, mais sustentável. Concluída essa etapa de elaboração dos termos de referência, as contratações, a gente está com grande expectativa de avançar no projeto, de fato, construir, né, uma cidade mais sustentável, resiliente, ativa, preparada, então, para desenvolver essas iniciativas de mitigação que respondam às mudanças do clima. Porto Alegre tem investido amplos esforços para ir nessa direção, nesse caminho, né? Esperamos que cada vez mais iniciativas como esta que a gente construiu com a Felicity, com o Clay, possam, de fato, né, multiplicar e fazer a diferença em escala local e global. Desculpe se falei um pouquinho demais aqui, mas é que eu tinha que dividir um pouco essa experiência tão bacana que a gente vem construindo em Porto Alegre. Obrigado.
Muito obrigada, Germano. Well, thank you so much. Yes, and I will have to say that personally, particularly, I'm very, very happy to see that. I'm also from Brazil, and my family is from Rio Grande do Sul, so I'm very proud to see that Porto Alegre is doing so much, and the state is actually investing in energy efficiency and seeing the benefits of all that. And I'm gonna take actually like your experience to ask the next question to Justine, because I could see from your presentation how much you have worked with project preparation facilities and in partnerships and having the support from different organizations. And I think like Justine, as also being the other side, so working as a project preparation facility and being one of the co-chairs of the project preparation action group in the Alliance, could you tell us what are and should be the main priorities for PPFs to continue to assist cities building bankable project as Felicity and others that Germano mentioned in his presentation?
So yeah, thanks a lot, Priscilla, for this question, and very interesting to see projects like that. And I think stepping back a little, what is also very important to highlight is the need to match the demand from city with the supply of finance, especially climate, because what we observe is that also that project preparation facilities have actually difficulty dispersing. And for that reason, the project preparation action group works on the earlier stages of project development, where technical assistance is actually must needed for city to actually kickstart their projects. So as regard to bankability of this project, I think it's a critical aspect, and project preparation can play an important role to help the demand from city match the supply at the earlier stages. So maybe I would highlight three main priorities for project preparation facilities and the priorities that we have within the action group of the CCFLA on project preparation. The first is, of course, building capacities, and we've seen how it's important in Porto Alegre, in many other cities, on building their capacity and capacities of cities to meet the funders and investors' requirement. And it's not that easy. It goes through developing their business models for their projects, to understand the cash flow generated, but also to evaluate possible co-benefits for their projects, etc. And at the project preparation action group, for instance, we've developed trainings, a readiness program in Mexico, for instance, and I'll go back to that later on. But on the other side, and moving forward, it's also very important for PPF, as I said, to understand what are the barriers and difficulties cities are facing and in meeting these requirements from funders and financial institutions, generally speaking. So for that, I would say that opening a space for dialogue, for multi-stakeholders coordination is very important. And also to create a common culture of work and common understanding of local context. And that's what we do, for instance, organizing a forum in Mexico, where cities can actually, this forum is aimed at cities to test their pitch, meet with financial institutions, understand the climate finance framework nationally. And eventually, very important, obviously, is before all that, providing an easy and transparent access to information for cities is actually critical, because as we know, it can be very hard, especially for smaller towns. Porto Alegre is quite a big town, a big city, right? But for smaller towns, it can be hard for them to navigate the ecosystem of all the project preparation facilities and the technical assistance they offer. So you talked about, Priscilla, the Green City Finance Directory that has been developed. It's a very interesting and a useful and handy tool, we hope, for cities to access the great range of offer that PPFs can offer. So overall, there's no standardized way for PPFs to help city develop bankable project, for sure. It's a complex issue, but it's very important to provide this dialogue space, and to also for them to adapt to local context, to understand and to provide an open access to information.
No, thank you so much, Justine. So building capacity, coordination, and have more transparent information for cities definitely is the is the lead. I want to go back to George, because I think, George, you brought some very interesting examples of land-based finance instruments. So now we are all the time talking about like demanding, meeting supply, and actually cities being able to have access to finance. And you mentioned this kind of instrument. Could you talk us a little bit more about this instrument and how could be replicated to, could they, I think that's the first question, be replicated to any cities? Or do you think there are certain factors such as the region they are, or the city size, or the admin characteristics that make them more or less viable?
So, I think we have to just dial back a little bit and understand that when you're thinking about, climate finance, green infrastructure investment, all these things, it's one thing to look at a city like Puerto Alegre, which we talked about, which has actual capacities. And then it's another thing to talk about where we actually need to make the investments, right? And most of these investments, we need to be thinking about making them in places that don't have already well-developed financial infrastructure, well-developed kind of civic infrastructure that allows them to do things like, I don't know, build land registration systems and know who owns the land so that you can actually collect revenues from the land, whether it's the property tax or other forms of land value capture. And so I think that if we really do want to think about how we approach new project finance, identifying, climate attendant projects, we have to first focus on building the capacity to do project finance at the most basic level. And those things include, getting us to understand that we're really entering into an entirely new area of expertise for local governments. Most local governments haven't been engaged in identifying pipelines of investable projects and figuring out how they're going to identify financing sources to finance them, because they've always relied on their national governments to do the lion's share of that kind of work. Moreover, we haven't gotten people attuned to the idea that the decisions we make now have a different set of stakeholders than we'd originally been thinking about when we made these plans. So for example, when you do carbon reducing strategies, the beneficiaries of carbon reducing strategies are global, right? But most people working on individual projects locally have no access to global investors who are going to benefit from reductions of greenhouse gas emissions, right? So how do we kind of draw those connections? And that's why something like the GAP fund is so important, because what it does is it allows us to start to get people to think a little bit differently and then make the connections. And once the connections are made, then we start to identify the real basic building blocks, which is now getting around to answering your question, which is we need national governments to build the right kind of legal enabling frameworks to give the power to local governments to actually collect revenues from land. In many cases, they don't have them. And so you can't just go to a place and say, oh, start collecting the property tax, because you have a national government that has to actually give the power to local governments to be able to collect the tax and enforce collection when people don't pay them. We need finance systems that allow them to kind of record when people are paying their taxes, and then keep the financing available to then be used for other sources. And a lot of these capacities just do not exist. Land registration systems are absent in many, many smaller cities in the developing world, and where we're going to see all the urbanization in Africa and in Asia. We need to find ways to use new technologies like remote sensing and drones and other things to be able to find low-cost ways to build land registration systems and not try to digitize really bad public records. But all of it is just kind of it's a paradigm shift. It's a changing way that we think about kind of the complicated relationship between the investments we make, the changes they make to the value of land, our ability to garner that money from that investment. They're all require different elements that in many cases don't exist. And we have to find ways to build those, to build those processes. And that's why you need something like a GAP fund, because it begins to identify the stakeholders. It begins to identify the missing elements. And it's not a one size fits all kind of, intervention. It has to be kind of customized to the place based on what the legal frameworks are nationally, based on the local capacities, based on the ability to marshal the right stakeholders to do the planning. And so in the end, we know that we need to be able to extract revenue from land in order to pay for a lot of these things. But to get there, there's like 6 steps beforehand you have to get to. And they start with a legal framework from the national government, and the next 2 or 3 steps are just building the basic capacity locally to manage that process. So I know that's not an easy answer to kind of get your brain around, but it's without those elements, you never have investable projects at the local level, because you don't have counterparties that can actually do their part to make a contract succeed. And so they can identify places where they might find revenue, but how they're going to get it, that's really important. And that's something that needs a lot of hand-holding and a lot of really careful assistance. So hopefully that answered your question, but it's a tough one, right?
Yes, no, thank you so much, George. You definitely answered my question. And I think like one message I can take, not like there are many, but is definitely we are all the time repeating that the cities are at central stage, that they have to be in an important place for the green transition, for climate change, but we also need to shift other topics. And this change looking not only to national governments, but to the city must be followed by capacity building, because we are giving more power for this. So this is great. Thank you so much for that. And you actually helped me with my transition, because now we're talking about actually what it is, the GAP Fund. I know that many that are today hearing us are curious or want to learn more and want to understand how to actually get access to the GAP Fund. So Julia, please tell us everything you know about the GAP Fund, from whom eligibility criteria. Will be very, very happy to hear from you.
Yes, so indeed, very good. The past 2 interventions have been very, very good transitions, because these are actually points that I would like to make in terms of what is the need, what type of support does the GAP Fund provide, and why that is needed. So the why, I don't think I need to say it anymore, because it has been skillfully said by my 2 predecessors. So I think what is important is to start with the idea that, of course, in cities, particularly in developing countries and middle-income countries, there is a lack of access to finance for projects, but there is also a lack of robust projects. So on the one hand, of course, the needs for investments are huge. And on the other hand, in order for that money to be able to be deployed, the projects need to be strong enough and well prepared. So the GAP Fund starts with this idea that there is a gap, as the name says, between in the early stage of project preparations. There are other project preparation facilities. Some of them have been mentioned already. There are many more, and they tend to target projects at a relatively, I don't want to say mature stage, but at later stage of the project preparation. And what we have seen together, the EIB, the World Bank, but also the city networks, we have seen a gap in the time that occurs between the moment the city has an idea or the city starts developing a strategy and the time they are able to put on paper a project or related to climate action in particular. So the GAP Fund is targeted at cities and local authorities in low and middle income countries. They have to be in the OECD DAC list, but this list is pretty extensive. So we are really trying to reach a very large number of countries. And what the GAP Fund will do is provide technical support for a number of things. First of all, for capacity building, which has already been mentioned and is essential to make sure that the cities have the right capacity and the right skills and the ability to plan for low carbon and climate resilient development, because without the planning, no good projects can take off the ground. Then the other type of support is a quite wide type of support, which refers to the actual preparation of the project. And we are talking about projects that are compatible with the Paris Agreement, so with the path of limiting the global warming to 1.5 degrees through emission reduction, carbon sequestrations. We are talking about projects in a number of sectors. So again, it's very difficult to be fully exhaustive because each project is unique, so we will need to see specifically what the city has in mind to be able to guide them. But just for you to have a little bit of guidance, we are looking at projects in energy efficiency, construction of green buildings or rehabilitation of existing buildings, sustainable cooling, use of nature-based solutions, and biodiversity protection as a means to deal with the effect of climate change, sustainable mobility, circular economy, water and wastewater management, urban transport, and so on. I think what is important is also to stress that we are looking at projects both on the mitigation side, but also on the adaptation side. So it could also be, for instance, enhancing the flood protection system of the city, or a project that just on the top of my head wants to use nature-based solution to increase coastal protection. So these are all projects that we're very happy to look at. And once the other 2 points I think are crucial for the mission of the GAP Fund is the fact of putting together a portfolio of projects that can be picked up by other project preparation facilities that are there. So I very much like the idea that nobody is able to do anything alone. So the GAP Fund as the objective to help as well deploy other project preparation facilities, some of which may be managed already by the EIB and the World Bank, but not only. There are others that are out there, and what we need to do and what we are trying to do now with the CCFLA as well is to really understand what are the conditions, what are the eligibility criteria for the other facilities, so that we really ensure that there is a high compatibility of the output of the GAP Fund. What we don't want is that we provide technical assistance to projects that then are not picked up or not interesting for other PPFs, and just then cannot find any other means of being supported after the GAP Fund has provided support. So we're really striving to achieve that. And linked to this is the issue of sharing knowledge, because there is, we understand that there is a huge confusion on the part of the cities and local authority as to what constitutes a good project. What are financial institutions looking for? How can I write my projects? How can I structure my project in a way that has a chance or maximizes the chances of being supported by project preparation facilities or financial institutions? So I think all these are key aspects of what the GAP Fund wants to do. I need to stress, I think, the fact that the GAP Fund is not looking at providing investment, so not financing the deployment of the project. We are really focusing on the setting up and the technical assistance for the project preparation. And another point is as I was talking before about co-benefits. I think the co-benefits come into play very much into the projects that the GAP Fund will look at, because we are really trying to valorize projects that have other environmental impacts, not necessarily related to climate, but we can imagine that a sustainable mobility project has impacts on air quality, for instance, or the greening of urban areas as impacts on health and air quality and so on. So these co-benefits will be definitely looked at very carefully. So if a city wants to apply, I think the first step would be to visit the website that we have set up, and I'm going to try a very technical move to write it down here, so you can all have a look. And I think the most important thing is really to start to look at what the GAP fund can do, and then contact us and see what can be done. There is an expression of interest that needs to be filled in for the project. So again, we are receiving a lot of questions as to, can NGOs apply, for instance? Can other entities apply? So we are really focusing on cities and local authorities. And of course, we're very happy if they work with other organizations, but we cannot provide funding to these other organizations to help the cities. The support is really directly for cities and local authorities. So every application will be reviewed, and if it meets the eligibility criteria, either the EIB Technical Secretariat or the World Bank Technical Secretariat will contact the city again to conduct a more in-depth analysis and appraisal of what the project actually is, what they are requesting the technical assistance for. And based on this, we will be able to scope the technical assistance and provide something which is as useful as possible and responds as much as possible to the needs of the city. So yeah, that's in a nutshell. There's much more to say, but
no, thank you so much, Julia. And I think you already answered one of the questions that we had in our chat about how NGOs could actually assist municipalities. It was exactly the question. Maybe just before we jump into the last round of questions that I'm going to ask for all the panelists on the GAP fund specifically, what do you see the role of the GAP fund in the green recovery? So like, why is this important, and how the GAP fund is thinking about this?
Yes, so of course, well, we started developing the GAP fund before the COVID crisis, but the moment we realized that this was going to have such an impact, we immediately tried to embed this in the thinking around the GAP fund and the types of projects that it can support. So the GAP fund is, I think, very well placed to support cities with the technical assistance in a number of areas. I think there are two main areas. One is the support to strengthening long-term planning and also strengthening the finance system. So there is this, it refers a little bit to what George was saying before about the need for structural reforms, for improving the system and the planning, but also supporting the city to prioritize potential investments. They will not be able to do every project or every idea that they have. So it is really a question of selecting the ones that are more needed and have the higher chances of succeeding given the local conditions. And then, of course, in the investment preparation, as I was saying before, we will look at the co-benefits, and we will look at one of the co-benefits is job creation. So the actual recovery and economic growth, but also we are talking about supporting cities to do the reconstruction in a way that is also climate friendly. So it generates growth, but also it generates growth in a way that is consistent with the Paris Agreement, and in general there is climate smart and resilient. So these are the two topics, I would say.
Great, thank you so much, Julia. And now I think we have a last final round of questions to our panelists. And I think I'm going to ask the same question to everyone. So like, I know that many of you already mentioned, but I would love to to hear like a summarize on what is necessary. So like, I don't know, maybe you can mention 1 or 2 topics for cities to lead the ways toward green recovery. So despite all of the suffering from the global recession and the missing revenue. So like, if we could list 2, which is very hard, but like, what should be the priority? And let's start with Germano and hear the Porto Alegre, the city perspective.
Então, obrigado, Priscila. Eu penso, né, que eu acho que existem muitas oportunidades, né, no mundo de infraestrutura, né, de financiar projetos de infraestrutura mais sustentável. Os bancos, né, os fundos internacionais querem cada vez mais, né, financiar esses projetos. No entanto, eu acho que a grande dificuldade, como eu ouvi nas outras falas aqui, é de fato a gente estruturar esses projetos de tal forma que eles, né, consigam se tornar viáveis perante essas instituições financeiras. Eu acho que os municípios, né, onde as pessoas vivem, né, onde elas exercem os seus direitos fundamentais, né, demandam por saúde, por educação, por transporte, por segurança e tantos outros serviços, né, são muitas demandas e exigem uma atuação permanente, né, dos municípios na resolução desses problemas, no dia a dia, né, e por muitas vezes nos falta tempo, assim, para estruturar esses projetos, né, a modelagem econômica, a captação desses recursos. As estruturas públicas são, né, especialmente também aqui no Brasil, são muito deficitárias, muito burocráticas, né, e em função disso, somado, né, essa alta demanda por resolver problemas diários, a gente por muitas vezes inviabiliza captar esses recursos. Por isso que eu acredito e aposto muito, assim, né, nesses modelos, na iniciativa da Felicity, por exemplo, né, que atua bem nesse ponto, né, que a gente considera importante, que é uma grande lacuna dos governos locais, né, trabalhar na estruturação dos projetos, assim, trabalhar na elaboração dos termos de referência, né, capacitação dos servidores, do quadro técnico. Eu acho que quanto mais os governos locais tiverem, né, esta familiaridade com essas fontes de financiamento, saberem como encaminhar esse assunto, mais a gente vai ter condição de desenvolver projetos sustentáveis. Então, acho que esse ponto é importante aí a gente desenvolver.
No, great. Thank you again, Germano. And definitely capacity building is a topic that is coming up. Justine, please, what will be your input?
So thanks so much. And again, there's obviously no unique and ideal way for cities to ensure green recovery, but I would highlight, as I said before, and as George mentioned as well, and Julia, and the need to strengthen enabling environments at national scale. So by supporting national government strategy on sustainable urban development. And actually, it's especially important when intergovernmental transfers are decreasing during economic recession. And it actually goes obviously hand in hand with building local and regional governments and cities at large fiscal and financial autonomy. And it's very important because this is what will help rebuild their fiscal space at a time when their own sources of revenue are decreasing under the impact of global economic recession. And this can go through other sources of revenue, as George mentioned. Land-based finance is really important. Local economic development, generally speaking, is very important, and important co-benefits to assess when structuring a project. And it is also important to think this fiscal space and financial space of cities in terms of diversification of revenues as well, and not just intergovernmental transfers, but also, as we said, access to climate finance is critical to ensure this green recovery, for cities to localize the international targets in terms of climate change, etc. And it actually also goes hand in hand with private investment. And in that respect, it will be probably even more important now than more important than ever, to reassure these private investors on investing in climate projects as well. And for that, I would highlight stakeholders that we are actually supporting at FMDV, which are subnational, what we call subnational development bank, and they can act actually as financial intermediaries for these for municipalities by providing guarantees and evaluating cities' creditworthiness. So I'll stop with that. I'll just add maybe conclude with a positive note on the fact that it can also be an opportunity now more than ever to continue integrating climate and ESG criteria as early as possible in the project preparation process.
Great. No, thank you so much, Justine, for so many different points and ideas. George, you already gave us a great insights and definitely a great speech on capacity building, but I would love to hear from you again.
So thanks, Priscilla. I think that the biggest thing that we have to do is empower local governments to be able to access the resources they need to lead a green recovery. And in order to do that, I mean, you know, we've already talked about building the capacity, and I'm a huge fan of things like this Climate Gap Fund, because what it does is it starts to build a practice that then becomes replicable, and it becomes a body of knowledge that is really useful in being able to help other places to begin to do the same things. We have to repeat the same things over and over again all over the world in terms of being able to put a project together, being able to get the right stakeholders, being able to identify the right revenue sources, the whole bit. And so, not to be depressing, but if this gap fund is going to leverage $4 billion of investment, which is really ambitious and good, we're going to need 230 gap funds to be able to meet the needs of $93 trillion of investment in green infrastructure by the year 2030. Now, we're not going to have 230 gap funds that are going to show up, because putting one together is difficult enough. And so now we're going to have to figure out, how do we make the best use of this opportunity from this gap fund, and how do we introduce the amplifiers that we need to be able to take the activities that take place under this gap fund and turn it into new activities that aren't going to require a gap fund to continue down the road. And what are those amplifiers? You already know, because we need networking, right? We need to be able to connect cities with each other so they can learn. We need a learning platform so people can learn from each other and learn how to share their knowledge and their practice, so that everybody doesn't reinvent the wheel all the time. We need to then take those networks and connect them to the global networks that make the local investments even more important. Like, how do you get access to carbon markets when you're making an urban project in Gambia? How does a Gambian local government even access any kind of climate financing without these networks, without these kind of amplifiers that are going to make it possible to do these things? So we have to find a way to take the impact of a gap fund and multiply it by 230, and we need to do it in the next few years, right? It's not a simple task, but it can be done if we actually find a way to commit to knowledge sharing, to networking, to learning, and we allow ourselves to kind of learn and do while we're out in there kind of, making some of these projects work. I mean, it's not, once again, it sounds a little bit abstract, it's not very simple, but look, $93 trillion is more than the GDP of the planet. And we have to find a way to get that amount of money invested in the next 10 years if we want the cities of the world to be on a sustainable path, right? How are we going to marshal the global GDP and more into this kinds of investments? We're going to have to get really good, really fast. And this gap fund is a really good start, but we need to figure out now, what are we going to do to amplify, to echo, to replicate those things over time?
Oh, a great point. And maybe, Julia, now as it's your turn, I think I'm going to ask the previous question that I did ask everyone, and maybe jump into what George just said. So, like, now we need 200 gap funds. We just launched one, but no, it's a joke. But how can we amplify what the gap fund will do? So if you could answer both, it would be great.
Yes, so I first want to touch upon what cities should focus on, and then definitely this is a very important point. So in terms of achieving the green recovery, I think that what happened in many countries is that, in most countries, that governments have, rightly so, concentrated their recovery packages and stimulus packages on sectors that were very, very hit by the crisis, and sectors that have a huge impact in terms of employment and growth and so on. The risk that is there is that there is that the stimulus could again focus on highly emitting sectors. So I think that there is a risk of missing an opportunity to build back better. To use an hashtag that I've seen, I think it's very relevant because. Any crisis like this one, but any crisis delivers opportunities, and there are business models that can emerge, and SMEs and startups, innovative startups, need to be supported. And I think that there is a conscious effort to be made and a question to be asked: is this really going to help us to achieve a green growth? Or not, and the money is limited, so prioritizing the investments to me is one of the key areas in which the cities should really work on, because they are the best place to do so. They know the city, they know the needs, they know their stakeholders. It is difficult from the outside to come and say what makes more sense. So there is a question of taking responsibility for this and really prioritizing what can deliver the green growth and green recovery. And then we will start first with try to operationalize this one gap fund. I think we have a lot on our plate, but indeed I think what the gap fund is supposed to do is really to give proof of concept and say that, okay, if we put money in reinforcing and strengthening project preparation and also improving the enabling environment, we can have results. Of course, these are long-term results, and if you intervene early on, it means that it takes time for a project to fully develop. I would be worried if it didn't, because there are so many things to take into account and so many aspects to take into account. But I think there are a lot of entities and either financial institutions, but also city networks and other project preparation facilities that are out there. And the key is really to work as a network, so not everybody in their own silos, which is something that I think the community tended to do because it's natural, but we have to overcome that. And if we do overcome that and we share the information and we try to be as transparent as possible, together we can change the way cities look at the projects. And we will try on the Gap Fund website as much as possible to share successful stories, for instance, and promote examples of projects that have received technical assistance and that have high potential. Of course, a lot of things can still go wrong in the project implementation, but I think it's important to show what we are looking at when we talk about a robust and well-prepared project. So, yeah. That's a small task.
Great. No, thank you so much, Julia. I don't see many questions in our chat, but there is one that I think it was also for you, Julia, and I just jumping a bit on what you said. So like how early stage can a project that be to the Gap Fund be? And I think the question was like, do the Gap Fund project have to have a role business model? So like, I think, should it be developed a bit, or it could be very, very, very early stage? So
I mean, it can be early stage. We don't. I mean, again, each project is unique. We look at when we do the selection, we will look at the potential for bankability, of course, because again, technical assistance that we have for the time being is limited, and we have to. If we have to prove that it can work, we have to be quite selective to which project we provide the support, at least in an initial stage. What I think is useful is to start a dialogue with the GAP Fund, with the Technical Secretariat, because in any case, when you submit, when a city submits an expression of interest, it doesn't end there, meaning that the city should put as much information as they have and really try to let us know what it is that they want to do, which problem are you trying to solve, and how are you looking at it. And then if the GAP Fund can provide support for, developing or analyzing the business case, or support in selecting the best alternative for the specific project. So we are talking about intervening quite early on. And so I think the idea is that we want the city to have done a certain level of reflection on what the issue is and how they're planning to solve it. But it is sometimes more difficult to correct something which has been half-baked, and then maybe the city, because of capacity issues, they didn't look at all the aspects, then to receive an application for a project which is fairly in a fairly early stage. And then when we do the selection, we will ask additional questions, and we will try to really scope the project and define the scope of the technical assistance that is most relevant for the project. So if you have a business model, if you have done already some studies as to how the project can generate revenues, and if the project can be self-sustainable, fine, so much the better. But it's not a requirement. We will look at it, as I said, because the perspective of bankability is important, not only for us, but also for other project preparations, and definitely in view of investments by IFIs. And
Great. Thank you so much, Julia. And we came to almost the end of our debate, for sure, for our panel. And but before we finalize, it would be great to hear closing remarks. And I'm very happy to call Mr. Norbert Gorison. I hope I have pronounced it correctly. He's the Deputy Director General at the German Ministry of Environment, so we call BMU, and the head of the Director of International Policy. So Mr. Norbert will tell us a bit more about the role of BMU in all of that debate and a topic that we just discussed, and then supporting cities nationally and internationally. So the floor is up to you, Norbert. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you very much for inviting me, for allowing me to close this session. I would not summarize this. I hope that is fine for you. It was a very rich debate. Thanks to all the participants, the panelists, for your excellent moderation, Priscilla, also for the opening remarks by my colleague Heike from the Ministry for Development Cooperation, and a big thanks in particular to ICLE, who organized this, I think, really extraordinary, daring cities conference, where this session is really apart from. So we know that the trillions have to be spent for recovery, which brings us away from just rhetorically speaking about a green and better recovery, but to a really better recovery after this crisis. And that is a huge opportunity to do it in the right way, to include a climate-friendly and resilient investment right there from the very beginning. And cities, that was the topic we are discussing here, are at the center of the climate crisis, both when it comes to the impacts and to the suffer, but also when it comes to the action. And we need about the huge investment needed there. So it exceeds $1 trillion yearly globally, and there is a huge gap of access or possibility of cities to access the finance, and there's of course even bigger access gap of the finance and as such to be available. And George mentioned it. We needed actually something like 200 gap funds. I like that idea, but I think the first thing we would like to do is really to work with the gap fund we are right now establishing and try to make it as strong and big as possible. And we are still inviting more donors to come in and to contribute to this gap funds. So it's one of the core focus of us to strengthen the capacities and resources of cities at home and globally. And just to give you also an idea what we are doing domestically, I would briefly talk about our national climate initiative, which supports cost-efficient climate action at local level in Germany. The measures supported here range from sustainable transport solutions in cities, such as planning bike lanes or investing in cleaner vehicles, for instance, electric buses, providing climate managers to local authorities, which help to mainstream climate into planning process, and much more to be done. And I very much like the concrete solutions which have been presented by Secretary Brem from Puerto Alegre. So things like that we're also promoting here in Germany. So we're not much better here. We have already invested more than 1 billion euros in 32,000 projects just in Germany. But that's only a drop in the ocean for if you look at the need even in Germany. With the International Climate Initiative, ICI, sustainable urban development has also become a very important cross-cutting priority for our funding since 2015. And the prominent example, I was very happy to hear about that. EIB is strongly involved, the World Bank is strongly involved here, is the City Climate Gap Fund, which we launched in the Climate Week only last September. So it's the first global fund supporting cities in developing and emerging countries in the very early stages of project development. I think the discussion this afternoon or this morning very clearly underlined why it is needed. We jointly, Luxembourg and my colleagues from BMZ, we have committed already 55 million euros to get this initiative started. We envisage an overall budget of at least 100 million, but as I said, more resources very much welcome. And then we hope that the Gap Fund can unlock 4 billion euros of investments to implement cities' climate plans. The Gap Fund is a motor of the Leadership for Urban Climate Investment Initiative, LUCI, which was one of the core deliverables of the Climate Action Summit last year. Let me also say a few words about the Green Recovery package we are providing also nationally and then also internationally. Cities are also here core of our interventions. In July, Germany passed an ambitious stimulus package of 130 billion euros, of which a third is allocated to investments in clean technologies, mostly climate related, and that includes support also to federal, states and municipalities. For instance, an additional 100 million euro recovery program for climate measures in cities and municipalities. Most importantly, national framework conditions are necessary to speed up local actions. George mentioned that several times in his interventions, and that's also true in Germany, but also beyond. In Germany and in the European Union, we are now committed to become climate neutral by 2050, and we have put that already in legal text, and now we are working in the EU as German presidency of the European Union Council update our NDC, and we are supporting the proposal which has been presented by the Commission to reduce our emissions in the European Union by at least 55%, and like to conclude these discussions, these deliberations by the end of the year. And cities also here have to play a crucial part. So let me just closing with some very general remarks. Without sustainable cities, there's no sustainable future. And therefore, we, as a Federal Ministry for the Environment, invite other countries to show decisive leadership and support the green recovery in their cities, and to shape a healthier and resilient future for all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Norbert, for all the work and leadership from BMU, BMZ. All of that has been key to cities all around the world, and actually for climate finance, it's wonderful to hear so many commitments to improve the access of cities to climate smart solutions. So I think I have a very difficult job now, 1 minute to actually have all the next steps and takeaways from everything we said in this last 1 hour and a half. And I think I will start, Norbert, with your phrase, without sustainable cities, there's no sustainable future, is a great phrase. But as Julia mentioned, there is a risk for missing the opportunity to achieve green growth. So for that, we need to empower local governments. As many of you mentioned, we need to have what George said, the amplifiers, so have connected cities, learning platforms so they could learn from each other. We need to create and structure projects better. So this was also brought by Germano. So we need to improve project preparation facilities and increase the work on the ground so they could assist cities that definitely lack the time and the capacity to mobilize and to work on all this structuring of projects. And as Justine also mentioned, we need to improve the enabling environment. So this means from our national governments, but also in a global scale, and have more intermediaries such as subnational development banks and the private sector acting and working together to improve all that. So I will leave you with this homework, with a lot of the things that we have to do together. And finally, thank you so much for your time, for everyone that watched us, but particularly to everyone that gave a bit of its experience time and spoke to us today in this panel. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Daring Cities.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.